What's good, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope y'all have been well. Today, we're stepping away from the GR Corolla stuff a little bit and going into some generalized repair. What we have is a Scion TC, and what we're going to be doing with the Scion TC is replacing the front and rear brake rotors and pads, as well as replacing the brake fluid, so flushing the fluid system. Now, this is going to be a common repair on most vehicles today. So the brake calipers are not the same as the GR Corolla. The GR Corolla has, like, I don't know what exactly they're called, but they're the Brembo style brake calipers. Now, those are the ones where you basically pull out the brake pads, you slot them back in, stuff of that nature. So today is going to be the general how-to for brake pad replacement, brake rotor replacement, and brake fluid changes. And I know you're probably wondering, well, why don't you do it on the GR Corolla? Well, I am pretty soon. I do have new brake pads, and I am thinking about taking off the rotor to have them resurface it. So I'm thinking about just taking those off, showing you how to remove the rotors on the GR Corollas, and doing a brake flush as well. So look out for that video soon, but today this is going to be a general video of how to replace brake pads and rotors on a common vehicle. Alright, so what you're going to need for this repair is basically a rear brake caliper toolkit. So you can rent these from an AutoZone or whatever your local repair shop is. Typically they'll have rentals available, or you can purchase your own. I can't remember the prices of them. You're going to need these for the rears. This C-clamp, I recommend getting a big one like this. These are going to be for pressing in the front, and I'll show you how to do that later. You're going to need some penetrating fluid, because if you haven't been down there in a while, it could be a little bit rusty. Just have this handy just in case, and it'll help you out a lot. DOT3 brake fluid is the typical brake fluid you'll need. Refer to your owner's manual or look at the top cap of your brake fluid reservoir. You're going to want some brake cleaner, towels. Gloves come in handy. You don't need them if you really don't want them, but they do come in handy. I recommend having an impact to be able to take off your wheel lugs. You're going to want a torque wrench for torquing down all of the things you're going to be taking off. This is if you're going to be taking off your caliper and your mounting bracket. You're going to want to torque those down later when you put them back on, as well as your wheel lugs. You're going to want a breaker bar to break the wheel lugs loose, as well as anything else like the caliper bracket, etc. The crescent wrench I have here is just in place of a specific millimeter wrench that you're going to be using for the bleeder valve when you're going to be bleeding your brake fluid on the caliper. I don't know what it is on the TC, so I'm just using a small crescent wrench instead. You're going to want a ratchet and assorted sockets depending on what size your wheel lugs are, and then what size the mounting bracket bolts, etc. are when you get to the calipers themselves. Now, moving on over here, these two things right here are going to be for the brake fluid flush. Now, this is a brake bleeder vacuum pump kit that I got at Harbor Freight for, I think it was about 25 bucks. Look out for these. These are fairly inexpensive, but this is going to come in handy for doing it on your own. However, there is another way of doing it, and I've done this plenty of times before. You don't need an Aquafina water bottle, but you can have any water bottle or whatever bottle you have available, even an old brake fluid bottle maybe. Be sure to put in some brake fluid at the bottom, a little bit, not a lot, but just enough to be able to submerge a clear tube into the bottom. I'll show you these two steps later using the brake bleeder kit, as well as the manual method that I have here. And then of course you're going to need, I recommend having 4 jack stands and your jack. The reason why I'm recommending having 4 jack stands is so that you could basically just raise this car up all the way. You don't have to worry about going to each side and jacking them up separately and then going back and then bleeding it that way as well. So you can just jack up the car, have it on 4 jack stands, and get everything done. It'll save you so much time, I guarantee it. So with all that out of the way, let's get started by jacking up the car and removing the wheels. All right, moving on to jacking up the car now that we got the wheel lugs broken loose. With most cars, you're going to find there are going to be specific jack points, such as right here. So this is in the front. Basically, you just press on this jack point with the jack, and it'll raise up the entire front. Same thing with the back. I'll show you here right now. Back is the same thing. It looks a little bit different, but right there is the jack point for the rear. So we're going to lift up the front, lift up the rear, put it on stands. Now we'll get moving. Oh yeah, and one thing before moving on, be sure to release your e-brake so that the rears don't get stuck on while you're trying to replace those. All right, I got all the wheels off, and as you can see, what you want to do with your wheels is just put them under the car just for redundancy, you know, just in case your jack stands fail or whatever else happens. I got 2 in the rear, as you guys see, 1 here and 1 on the other side. But now we have free access to all 4 corners to be able to replace the rotors, brake pads, and also get the fluids done in one go without having to lift up each side over and over again. So let's get these rotors and brake pads replaced, and then we'll move on to the brake flush. So starting off with the front brake change, what we're going to be starting with and what I'm going to be showing you is if you're just replacing the brake pads and not the rotor, then what you're going to be starting with is right here. In my instance, it's going to be a 14mm socket on this bolt right here. Now this is for the caliper to the caliper mounting bracket. So you're going to remove this one and also this one down here. Basically just pry this off and then set it up here for a second. Then you're just going to replace the brake pads that way. So I'm going to remove that really quick, and then we'll get on with the further steps for removing the brake caliper bracket as well as the rotor itself. All right, one thing you're probably going to run into when you're pulling off just the caliper itself is that this right here, this little nut right here, this is where your bolt, your caliper bolt, will go into. Now this is a little bit tricky to get to sometimes with a crescent wrench or even with a regular wrench that's, you know, the proper size for this. So what I like to do sometimes is I do use vice grips, and I do the vice grips on top of the rag onto that nut to hold it in place while I take this off, because otherwise it'll just spin in place and it kind of gets annoying. So you can do it this way, or if you have another way, post in the comments down below. But this way has worked for me, and it's worked to not, you know, shred the frickin' nut right there. So this is the way I'm doing it. Anyways, let's continue taking off the caliper. All right, so once you take the caliper off, you might want to also take off the brake line bracket right here, just so you have better flexibility with the brake line itself. That way it doesn't snap or bend or anything, so I'm going to do that right now. But you could just lay it on right here for now, or you can take a bungee cord and maybe wrap it around there, have it just hanging, but this has worked out for me. All right, so with removing and replacing brake pads alone, once you get the caliper off and it's set to the side, all you got to do is wiggle these out. And that's it. So these brake pads aren't terrible, but it is squeaking quite a bit. I think maybe it's just been a while and they're just old. I don't know. That's all you gotta do. Just wiggle them out. That's it. So now that we have the old brake pads off, I'm gonna go ahead, show you how to remove the bracket and then remove the rotor. Then we're gonna put all the new stuff back on and get on with the rears. All right, so how we're gonna be removing the brake caliper bracket is by going behind the rotor and removing these 2 bolts that you see right here. Now I recommend spraying penetrating fluid on both of them, just like we did with the caliper bolts, and then breaking them loose. In my case, it's gonna be a 17mm socket. Yours might be different, so just verify that. But just remove those 2, and then this bracket comes right off. All right, so as you guys saw, it took a bit to make them budge using the breaker bar. Now, I was just holding onto it, just prying on it. Use as much leverage as you can to be able to pry those loose. Penetrating fluid will definitely help you out here. So do that and then remove it the rest of the way using a ratchet. All right, so one thing I love to do, especially with hubs that look like this, you know, rusted and all that, is before you put the new rotor on, and really everything, the caliper bracket, the caliper itself, you want to clean up the area. So even the caliper, just go ahead, spray it down with a bunch of brake cleaner. I like to use a wire brush, just scrape around everywhere, get a lot of rust off in here, maybe even in like around the edges right here as well, of the piston, things of that nature. Just clean it up and then wipe it down, and then we'll go on with installing the new stuff. Okay, so when cleaning the caliper bracket, you're gonna wanna take off these clips right here, because typically your brake pads are gonna supply new ones. So these come in the package of the front brake pads. Now, these are going to slot in exactly where these are. And I'm going to show you how to do that after I remove these, just so I can clean the entire bracket and then put these on a freshly cleaned bracket. Now you can remove the clips from the bracket whether it's unmounted like this, or it is mounted and you're just doing the brake pads with the rotor still on. So let me go ahead, remove the clips, clean the bracket, and then put the new clips on before we reinstall everything. All right, so how you're gonna wanna put these on is basically you see this like thing sticking out, this little clip part. You're gonna want this just like so. So now, as you can see, these little clips are going towards the inside. Each clip is gonna be different. It's gonna be for each particular spot. So you're gonna wanna make sure that you're putting the clips in the right areas. It might be different for your caliper brackets for whatever brake pads you have, but it's gonna look something like this. All right, so now we get to install the new brake rotor. Now, before you install the brake rotor, you're gonna wanna take it out of the packaging, set it in the box, and you're just gonna take some brake cleaner, spray it on, wipe it down, get any of the packaging BS off of it, and then you're ready to put it on. All right, so as you can see, this is being a little bit of trouble, so it keeps popping off while I'm trying to put the bracket back on. What you can do is you're gonna take one of your lug nuts, you're gonna socket it in to the bottom one, as far as it'll go. That way, this will stay in place. So let's move on with the process again. So now that we have the mounting bracket tightened down, we need to torque it. Now, from what I saw online, I guess it's around 75 foot-pounds for the front, for the bracket, so we're gonna do that. And it's about 25 for the caliper itself. So pretty much just hand tied on that one. So we're gonna torque the bracket down and then get the brake pads in, get the caliper back on, and move to the rears. All right, so I had a little dumb moment here. So I actually put on the rears on the front. I wasn't thinking anything of it. I just tossed it on, put the bracket on, torqued it down. Bad on me. Anyways, here is the front rotor. Now, this is actually a good training thing for you guys if you don't know. This is a rear rotor. This is a lot smaller than your fronts because the fronts are gonna take a lot more of the load because more of the weight is in the front typically on every single car. So the fronts are gonna be a lot thicker. They're gonna have these vents on them. The rears are gonna just look like a disc, just like this. So this is a front rotor. This is a rear rotor. So let me get this on right and then we'll get on with the brake pads. All right, now moving on to the brake pad preparation. Now I have the old ones here as a reference because we're going to have to put on a clip just like this one onto the new pads. Now as you can see, these pads pretty much look the same. Some manufacturers and some pads, they are different. So some of them will go towards the outside, some of them will go towards the inside. These doesn't matter at all. The only thing you need to be focused on is where you put these clips. Now as you can see, this is basically how it would fit into the bracket. So the clips are on the top. So you're gonna want the clips to go on the tops of these as well. So we're gonna line them up just like so. So which means you're gonna want a clip on here and a clip down here. So I'm gonna put those on really quick and show you the end product. And there you go. So we've got the brake pads prepped and ready to go. Now, as you can see, there's a shim on here. Now, most brake pads nowadays have a shim, so you won't have to use any of the brake pad lubricant on the back, like brake squeal lubricant on the back. And typically, though, if they are not already attached, they will have shims in the packaging. But like I said, it doesn't hurt to have some of that squeal liquid on there. Anyways, let's put these brake pads on and get done with the fronts. All right, so how you're gonna wanna put these in is basically the inside of this, you're gonna wanna turn like this so that it doesn't get blocked by the bracket. You're gonna turn it, put it in, and then rotate it this way, push it on. Easy as that. Now do the same thing with the inside pad, you're gonna be good to go. Perfect. All right, before putting the caliper back on, you're gonna wanna do one thing, and that is open your hood and find your brake fluid reservoir. Here is the brake fluid reservoir. You're gonna find it around this area. If it's not on the driver's side, it'll be on the passenger side, but you'll typically find it around this area of the driver's side. Now, in my case, all I gotta do is take off these tabs and pull this up and away. And there we go, we have full access to the brake fluid reservoir. Why you wanna open this is because what we're gonna be doing next with the brake caliper is using the old pad, putting it right here, and now using the C-clamp, to go ahead, press the brake pad into the piston and push the piston back as far as it'll go. That way it'll be able to fit over the new pads. Okay, and while you're pushing the piston in, it's going to be pushing that brake fluid back through the hose. There's going to be fluid that'll push up here. Now, what I recommend doing, since you can't really drain it from here, it's all down there. What I'm going to recommend doing is just putting some rags right here just in case some does spill over. But for now, we are going to press in on the caliper. Okay, so now that we have the caliper piston pushed in, this is going to be a little bit tricky. So what you're going to want to do is kind of push back on these mounting posts for the caliper, right? Because it's going to be a very tight fit. Now, as soon as you get the caliper over the little bracket slot right here, start screwing it in. That way you don't have to go through this process again. Anyways, watch how I do it. It's going to be a little bit tricky and tight, but you'll get it if you work it enough. So let's get into it. Now, tighten them down, pretty much hand tight. You could do 25 foot-pounds is what I saw for the caliper bolts for the torque, but 25 foot-pounds is pretty equivalent to hand torquing it. So anyways, you do you, but I do recommend torquing it to spec. All right, got the caliper bolts on and tightened down. Now, if you took off your brake line bracket, just go ahead, put that back on, fully tighten that down. Now it's time for the rears. Okay, going back into the engine bay really quick, as you can see, there is visible fluid now. So while we were pushing that piston in, it was pushing that fluid up. So after we do the rears, we're probably gonna check on it. Might have to drain it, might not. Might last until we might go to the top of this. So you might be able to just flush it out through the brake calipers later if it doesn't reach the top of this, but worst case, we'll just take some of it out of this reservoir before we move on. Anyways, just want to show you guys that, and let's get to the rears. All right, with the rear brakes, it's a similar process to the fronts, but in this case, all these bolts are pretty much the same size. So the caliper bolts, that are gonna be 14 mil, the bracket is 14 mil, and even the brake line bracket is 14 mil. So that's convenient back here. Now, it could be different for your vehicle, like I mentioned before, but it's pretty much the same process. So we're gonna go ahead, spray brake cleaner on the caliper bolts and also the bracket bolts, and then we'll go ahead, remove the caliper, remove the bracket, and then replace the rotor. So in some cases with the rear caliper, it's going to be a little bit tricky. Like sometimes you can't just move it up on top of the shielding, but you're able to move it around a little bit. And for now, this will work out. Once we get the bracket off, we'll be able to move it a little bit away. But now we're going to be removing these two bolts, get the bracket off. But first, we're going to be taking away these brake pads. You want to look at how these came off, right? So this was the more inside one. It has this little tab that was facing downward. So make sure that whenever you put your new brake pad in, it's the one with the tab going on the inside and down below. So anyways, let's move on, take off the bracket and continue the process. We got the bracket off. That was a little bit just tricky. It was just annoying just getting in here trying to get around this. But this is laying on here now, so that's good. It's not just pulling on this brake line. And now what we can do is take off the rotor. All right, gonna want to make sure we clean up the area as we did with the front, and definitely clean this off before we press this in. So go ahead, spray the entire area down, clean it up, clean off the new rotor, and then before putting the rotor on, I'm going to show you how we're going to press in this piston. Moving on to the rear caliper now, we have this little thing. Now, it's cross-shaped, right? So you're going to need a special tool to be able to push this in. And that's what I was talking about earlier, and this is the special tool you'll need. Like I said, you can rent these from an auto parts store near you, or you can just buy one for yourself. I can't remember how much they are, but you can rent these. So what you're going to be doing is find the right adapter piece to be able to fit into these little slots. Now, this works for me. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be putting it onto here. It's magnetic, so it'll just snap on. And you're going to move this piece as close to that adapter as possible, because this is how you're going to be doing it. Now, this is going to act as a brake pad, and you're going to be slotting it in like so. All right. And then from there, here, let me move you guys over a little bit. And then from there, you're going to have this adapter piece slide into these little notches. Now what you're going to be doing is loosening this up until, or not really loosening it, but turning this to the left until this part of it is snug and this is ready to be pressed. So now what we're going to do is just turn this until it goes. This is going to take a little bit of force, but you can get it done. And every now and then you're going to want to back this off so you can tighten it back again. And then keep going. You're going to want to do this pretty much until it stops, but you don't want to overdo it, you know? Like right there. So that stopped. So we're good to go there. Now take the tool off. Now it's time to put the new rotor on. Now, same thing I did with the front. This is going to keep wanting to come off. So go ahead, take a lug nut, tighten it down onto the bottom. That way it won't move. All right, so similar to how we did the front caliper bracket, this caliper bracket has tabs as well, but these are full ones, so they're not single that go on each end. There we go. So essentially this is how it's gonna look going back on. So you're gonna want these brackets to go on like this, with the ramps facing that way, okay? So I'll show you the new product in a second, and then we'll get moving on with reinstalling everything. All right, as you can see, the tabs are put onto the caliper bracket. It'll look something like this for you guys as well. Like I said, every car is gonna be different, so be sure to read your manuals in the brake pads just to make sure that you're putting them on correctly if there is a particular way to do that. But for the most part, I think the rears are gonna look something like this. Now, put the rear bracket back on. Make sure to torque it to your spec. You can find them online, like I said earlier, for the fronts. Make sure to get the rear torque specs, but torque that down to spec for the bracket. Put the brake pads back on, and then we'll put the caliper on. So installing the rear brake pads, like I pointed out earlier, the inside portion of this is gonna have this tab facing down. So we got the right brake pad here. We're gonna be able to slot it in perfectly. The other one is not gonna have a tab, it'll just go in this way. So make sure whenever you're removing the old pads on your car that the new pads look the same as the old pads that you had in there, okay? Just to make sure that you would do it correctly. So anyways, we're gonna put the pads in correctly and then get on reinstalling the caliper. All right, now I'm gonna put the brake line bracket back on. New rotors on, new pads are in, everything's tightened down here. Now, I'm gonna get to the driver's side, which you guys don't need to see because you already saw how we do the front and the rear, so just do that on the other side. And then I'm gonna get back to you guys on how we do the brake flush. So, talk to you guys in a second when I'm done with the driver's side. All right, so I'm working on the driver front right now, and I did run into a little bit of a nuisance with the rotor, so let me show you what's up. So basically, I already got it loose, but this thing was sticking quite a bit because of the rust and things like that. Now, a couple things you could do with this is you could put some penetrating fluid on there, just kind of like shake it a little bit, or you could take a mallet, just kind of hit around here, maybe right here, or you can even tap it from the back, and eventually it'll just break loose and you can pull it away. So that was just a little tip that I kind of forgot to mention earlier, but good thing it happened to me because I remembered. Done with the driver's side. Now it's finally time to flush the brake fluid. As you guys can see, here, let me get the light on. there is quite a bit of fluid in there now, and it is very dark. So good thing we're doing this flush because it really needs it. So let me go take a break really quick and I'll be right back out and we'll get started. Back from my break. Now we are on to the different ways that you're going to be able to bleed your brakes. So starting with the brake bleeding pump. Now with this vacuum pump setup right here, these attachments are going to go on the bleeder valve, and these hoses are going to go onto, where'd it go? This lid, where you could see on here, this part of it says to the pump, so that means it's going to be one of the hoses that go to here, and then this hose is going to be going to the bleeder valves. So let me show you how to set this up. What you're going to want to do is take the bottom of the cap, put one of these little hoses on there. Once you have a hose onto the cap, you're going to put the cap on, tighten it down. You're going to take one of the hoses, put it on the two pump side. You're going to take the other hose, put it on the other end. Now what you're going to want to do is take one of these attachments that are going to be going on your bleeder valves, see which one fits onto the bleeder valve first, and then put that into the tube. So we're going to see which one goes on mine really quick. And what I found is that this size, this is the smallest size, goes perfectly on the front caliper's bleeder valve. And I did notice that for the rears for this car, the hose itself works perfectly. This one is too big for that one be in the rears. So we'll put this on for the fronts and just put the hose on for the rears. Before moving on, in the package, you'll get a couple of O-rings. So you're gonna wanna seat that O-ring in the top of this cup, in this little groove. So let me do that really quick. We're gonna do the first method right now, and then I'll show you how to do the second method, which is the makeshift method with a bottle and just some of the hoses in a second. All right, before we get started with this flushing process, I do want to point something important out. That is where we're going to be starting the flush. We're going to be starting the flush as far away from the reservoir as possible. So as you guys see here, the reservoir is on the driver's side. So we're going to be starting on the rear passenger first. That is the furthest wheel away from the reservoir. So we're going to be starting with the rear passenger, go over to the rear driver side. Then we're going to flush the passenger front, and then we're going to do the driver front. And that is going to be the rotation that we're going to be taking to properly flush the system. All right, so make sure you have your crescent wrench or whatever wrench fits onto your fittings. You can find out which one fits perfectly, maybe like, I don't know, 8-10 mil or something, but I'm just using a crescent wrench. It'll be easy for me. Make sure you have that available so you can crank this open. What we're going to be starting with is wherever the two pump side is, so right here, we're going to be putting the pump onto that hose. Once we have the pump on the right side, we're going to be putting the other end, so this end, onto the valve. Oh yeah, one thing I want to point out is if you are just using the tube, like we're going to be doing in a little bit with the second method, I recommend having a zip tie and zip tying it enough to where it'll clamp down around the valve and it'll block off any air that may come in. When the zip tie is on, you can still pry it away, but it's got a good enough seal. As you can see here, you just kind of put it back on. And there you go, should be good. But thought that would be a good note. Let's move on. Okay, now that you have your O-ring on your lid, that's properly sealed. You have the outlet going to your valve. You have the inlet to the pump connected to your pump. You're gonna go ahead, pump it up to about, I don't know, 15. Leave it there. And then you're gonna go ahead, crank open your valve. So go ahead and open it. Ever so slightly. You only need to open it about a quarter, maybe a half. And then keep pressure going. You don't want to open it a little bit more. Look at all that air coming out. So that's what you're going to want to see. You're going to want to see a bunch of the air flowing out. And then you should start seeing this start to fill up. Get a bunch of the fluid in here as well as air bubbles. And we're going to close this off really quick. Gonna come over to the reservoir really quick, look at the fluid. Now it's starting to go down, so what you're gonna wanna see, we're gonna take these away now. Basically, it's pretty high up right now, but the low marker is right down there, and you want the fluid to get somewhere in the middle. Once it gets in the middle, you can start filling it up, and as you're flushing it, as you're basically draining it out, you're gonna wanna keep this up. You don't want any air to go in, so you basically don't want it to go past the low mark on your fluid reservoir, okay? So we're gonna continue that process until the fluid is a good color. And then during the process, as it gets a little bit fuller, just go ahead, dump it out. And I mean, look at that, it's a dark color. Now the other stuff, it's still yellow, but it's a very lighter, very much so lighter yellow. So anyways, I'm gonna dump this out and we'll get to it again. Oh yeah, one thing I wanted to mention before moving on, you don't wanna keep this cap open while you're flushing. You want to close it every time you go to refill or after you check it and stuff. So we still have plenty. So you want to make sure that the cap is on so that no air possibly gets through the system again, okay? So make sure it's capped and then continue on the process. All right, it's taken too long to get the air bubbles out with this method of the vacuum brake bleeding. So we're gonna use my method that is tried and true, and it's a lot cheaper with just a bottle and some of the clear line. And I'm gonna show you that right now. It's going to be a similar process to how the vacuum bleeder works, but we're going to be using the same hose with the zip tie on it. And what we're going to be doing is we have a bottle and we filled it up enough to where we submerge the hose, right? So we submerge this clear hose into the bottle. What we're going to be doing is opening this up about same thing, quarter, halfway. So I'm going to do that right now. All right, so we got this open now, and as you can see, there's fluid pouring out. A couple bubbles. Obviously, there's still air in the line. And the reason why we have this submerged in some fluid already is just so that there's no air that gets back up into the system as we're about to do what we're about to do. Now, this process is going to be exceptionally easier if you have two people, but I'm going to show you how it's done with just one person. It'll just take a little bit longer, but it can get done with one or two people. So with your valve open or closed, doesn't really matter. You're going to want to top off your reservoir before starting this process. So go ahead, put some more brake fluid in. Okay, set this to the side, cap it up, close this off as well. So now what you're going to be doing is going inside the car and pressing the brake pedal. So you can do it by hand, you can do it by foot, whatever. And then check everything. So check the fluid. Still a bunch in there. Let's go over and check the bottle. So as you can see, nothing's really gotten into the bottle yet. Objection! What we want to see is a steady stream going through here. So let's go back to it. Now, one thing that can help you in this process is to turn the car on and have the brake booster help you out with this process. It'll just make it a lot easier. All right, so as you can see, we're starting to get more of a flow in there, but there is still a little bit of a gap, but there is fluid going down into the bottle. And continue doing that, and hopefully all the air gets out and we just get a steady, clean flow of brake fluid. All right, so as you can see, we now have a steady stream going in here. So now we're gonna pump this out until it looks pretty clear as it's gonna be from the new stuff. And you can go ahead and turn the car on if you want. It'll let the brake booster do its thing and it'll make life a lot easier, but you don't have to. If you're sitting down, then you can put enough force onto the brake pedal and push it all the way to the floor. It'll do the same process. So those are the two methods of bleeding your brake system. I'm gonna continue doing my method all the way around and then I'll get back to you guys in a bit. But if your lines don't have that much air in it, I don't see why the vacuum pump wouldn't be beneficial to you guys. You can just sit there, pump it up, and it'll do the same thing, hopefully with less air. This car has a ton of air in the lines, I guess, so I'm just doing it my way. Like I said, in my opinion, it's more efficient to get the air out in a timelier manner, so I'm doing that. I'll get back to you guys in a bit when we're done with all four corners. But those are the two methods, so pick and choose whichever one you feel like doing. All right, so here is the last batch. I already dumped some of it out, but here is the last batch of it, and I just wanted to showcase some stuff. So if you guys don't know, there are seals inside of the system, and eventually they break down. Now you can see that black sediment in there. Those are part of the seals typically. Just pointing that out. Just when you see this, maybe take it into a shop and have them evaluate. Obviously, I just wanted to show you guys that really quick and tell you that if you do see sediment and things like that, it's sometimes normal, but a lot of it could be indicative of future problems for the brake system. So be aware of that. All right, done with the driver front. Now it's all sealed, everything's good. But we got it to just in between the max and the min, so good there. Anyways, if you guys got some good use out of this video and you enjoyed it, then please leave a like, subscribe if you're not subscribed yet, leave your comments in the comments down below. Did you guys learn anything new? Maybe this was just a refresher for you, and what different ways would you do certain things that I did, or maybe that I didn't do? Let me know in the comments down below. Anyways, I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.